All right, so we're into day 2 of our project vehicle, and we've ripped apart the front end with our ASE certified master technicians. Jim, can you tell me a little bit about what we found once we started disassembling everything?
Sure. So as we expected, several of these parts were degraded to the point where they definitely needed to be replaced. The bushings were bad. We got to a point where we were removing the ball joint nut and trying to separate the ball joint from the spindle. And using the press, we ended up pushing on the top of the ball joint stud and deformed it a little bit enough where the nut wouldn't come out. So we ended up having to cut that off. But other than that, it's coming apart pretty well. We're definitely finding some things that need to be replaced, but overall, it's coming along nicely.
Okay. And we had to make a few runs to the Napa store as we were tearing it down. What did we end up buying yesterday?
So we found that the brake hoses should definitely be replaced. Mm-hmm. They were, a lot of mileage on them in time, so it's probably right to go ahead and do that. We also got the new bearings and seals for the rotors that we're putting on, and grease and caliper slide lube, all that kind of stuff.
So if you were doing this project at home, how often would you normally have to replace the brake lines and the seals and everything? Is that a normal thing somebody should be doing with their car, or?
So in this case, we're replacing the calipers, and when you're replacing calipers, it's always a good idea to replace the hose with it. You don't know what's going on with the inside of that without cutting it apart, and you would destroy it to do that anyway. But in a vehicle with this kind of mileage, definitely want to do that. I would say anything over 90 or 100,000 miles, you probably want to replace those hoses if you have it apart to this point.
Okay.
And so as far as the seals, anytime you take the brake rotor off on a spindle type front suspension, you need to replace those seals because they get damaged taking them off.
Okay. So what are we jumping into today then? Now that we have all that.
We're going to start doing the steering system. So all of the steering linkage will get off and replaced, and then we'll work on the rear suspension as well.
Okay, awesome. Let's get to it. So while we have Daryl washing the steering knuckle, cleaning that up in our parts cleaner, Jim and I are going to look at taking apart the steering linkage assembly. And what's next after that, Jim?
So what we're going to do is first we're going to separate it here at the pitman arm. We'll get this large nut off, and then we will also remove these bolts and nuts for the idler arm. And then you need to use a puller to pull this pitman arm off of the shaft, and then we can remove the whole steering linkage as an assembly. That way, once we have it off, when we start to build our new assembly, we can assemble all of the parts together and have them look just like the old one. Then when we go to put it in, the alignment should be close and give us a good starting point.
Awesome. All right.
Hopefully you caught my amazing reflexes there.
I did not. Well, I did on my hair.
I'm gonna go ahead and get the idler arm nuts loose. I'm not gonna remove them completely, so that way when it's still held up when we go to take that pitman arm shaft off. So that's ready to go. Let's get our pitman arm puller. So this tool will slide over the pitman arm and then down and use a pressing force to pull it off of that shaft. These tools generate a lot of force, and it would be very hard to try to do this manually with regular tools, with pry bars, even with heat.
Yeah.
It would be very difficult, and so I would not recommend that. And you can see just how easy that was with the right tool here. All right, now that that's loose, I'll have you hold on to that pitman arm and this side of the linkage while I take these off the rest of the way, and then we can take the whole assembly apart. There we go. Let's set it over here. Now we can build ours to look just like that one.
So after you take off the steering linkage assembly, is there anything else that we need to inspect under here, or anything else before we start reassembling and putting it back on that we need to look out for?
Sure. So obviously our sway bar is still in. We're going to be replacing these bushings because we did find that they are loose. You can actually see some play here and some daylight through this one. Also, you're never going to have a better time to inspect the shaft seal here on the pitman arm shaft, and if it's leaking, now is a good time to replace it because you have that off. And then just a general inspection of the area, make sure that everything looks good, that there's no damage and bend parts, things like that.
And just for new guys like me, this is what connects it to your actual steering box.
Yeah, so your steering shaft will come down from your steering column into the steering box here, which then converts the rotational movement this way into a rotational movement this way. And so this is called the pitman arm shaft, and there's a seal here that seals the fluid inside of it.
And does that seal typically need to be replaced with that too at all, or is that normally good after you disassemble these?
I usually don't replace them if they're not leaking.
So we have our steering linkage assembly and we have it laid out on the table here, and we're going to use our new Napa chassis parts to rebuild this. Jim, can you walk me through what all the pieces are that we have and what we're going to be reassembling?
Absolutely. So starting where the steering actually starts, the pitman arm is connected to your steering gearbox. So that's this part here. That's connected to the center link. Some people call it a drag link, but this is the center link. We have the idler arm over here, and what that does is it holds the steering linkage on both sides so that it can pivot properly. Then we have the inner tie rod ends, the adjusting sleeves, and the outer tie rod ends.
Okay. So what do we need to do first? Where do you want to start?
Let's start by unboxing this stuff. And so we have these kind of laid out like they are on the table. This will be our center link. Let's go ahead and pull these out and start putting them in place where they go.
Okay. Ooh, look at that beautiful Napa bag.
You're holding the idler arm, and I have the pitman arm here. And just be aware there are sometimes small parts inside the box, so make sure you check for those. Next up, we've got our adjustment sleeves.
So when we're using these adjustment sleeves, what does this do for us as far as, like, I know it connects the inner and the outer tie rods. How is that? Why do we have this?
So these are important because what they allow you to do is adjust the toe setting during the alignment process. And so when you screw that adjustment sleeve, it's threaded correctly on one end and reverse on the other end. So as you tighten it, it will actually pull the ends together or push them apart. That allows you to set individual toe for the whole system. So as you can see here, these are packaged nicely. They have the small parts inside of the bag here for each part. And so you want to keep all that stuff together with the appropriate part that it came with. You'll see a lot of little parts like the cotter pins and the grease zerks.
So now if I'm looking at these, how do I know if this is the inner or the outer?
That's a good question. So you can match them up and also look at the way that the threads are pointing as well. Now they do look very similar, so you do have to just pay attention and look. Also, another thing you can do is look at the location of the grease fitting, or the grease zerk. If you notice, on this one, the inner tie rod end has it on the end, whereas the outer tie rod has it in the center. And so that's another way to tell. So we're gonna go ahead and start assembling our steering linkages, but I wanted to show you here. This is a four-wheel drive pitman arm, and you'll notice that it has a wear point here. We have a two-wheel drive truck, and so the pitman arm is different. This one does not have any wear points, so after a thorough inspection, we determine that this thing is good. We'll just reassemble it with that. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna put these two together along with the adjustment sleeve and get it to the approximate right length that we see here with the old one. So as you remember, I mentioned there is going to be some that are reverse threads. So you can see here, these threads taper and go down this way. So this is a left-handed thread. And then the outer tie rod end on my side is going to be a right-hand thread. So right now I'm just kind of lubing up these threads here so that as this vehicle ages, it will protect these threads from rusting and getting stuck.
So do we need to do that on these threads as well, or is it just for the adjuster sleeve piece?
Just for the adjuster sleeve piece.
Okay.
Rotate it a little and just do that all the way around. So now just double check that the length is similar.
Yep, good there. All right, so now the castle bolts that came off of these pieces, are we reusing that, or are we using this thing that came with the new part?
Great question. So we don't want to reuse the old nuts off of the old steering system, but sometimes what you'll notice is that the new part will come with either a lock nut that's been swaged, so either squished, or a castellated nut. And if the stud has a hole in it, I prefer the castellated nut just because of the extra safety that you get from the cotter pin.
Okay.
while you're putting that together, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to disassemble this pitman arm.
Okay. Now, is there a specific torque spec that we have to torque these down to?
Absolutely. Every fastener on a vehicle has a torque spec. And so we've looked these up. These are 35 foot-pounds for all of the castellated nuts on this system.
Okay.
And then the pitman arm, the large nut on the pitman arm, that one gets torqued to 189 foot-pounds.
Okay.
Got that pitman arm off. I'm going to do an inspection on it. You can see here, this one actually looks like it may have been replaced in the past because it's fairly new. The bore is in really good shape, and all of the splines inside of here are in good shape as well. So we can go ahead and install this onto our new steering system.
Is there a specific angle these need to be at before we torque it down?
There's not. So you can do it here, or we can do it also once we get it up on the vehicle, which might be a little bit easier just because everything's already held in place. So now we're to the same point, right? They look identical, other than the pitman arm on this one. So let's go ahead and put it up there.
Okay. Before we put back the steering linkage up here, we're going to take off the sway bar to get it out of the way.
Yep.
When we reinstall this, we'll put new bushings for that, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So what's next?
Let's take these bolts out that hold
right.
this on. I'll take these two off, and then I'll hand you this, and you can take those off. Now you can see I didn't have to put any backing on it. These don't have any nuts on the backside, but sometimes they do, so you need to watch that. All right. We'll set that over here. And now we can take our steering linkage and just put it right up.
Okay.
So we're going to reverse the order of removal. Get that over the skid plate there. All right, on your side, you need to get your splines lined up with the pitman arm shaft. And on my side, I will get these bolts for the idler arm lined up. So we want to make sure that we get it in the same spot that it was when we took it off. So if you look here, we can look at the splines and see that it was I believe it was right. You have to lift this up a little bit. Somewhere in that vicinity there. And you just kind of have to turn it till you get it in spot. There you go. And it doesn't need to be tight yet. We'll get to torquing that here in just a moment. I let you do that part first because these bolts could fall inside the frame. So now I'm going to get a tool to hold those in while I get the nuts on there. You can hold them with this. Now I'm just going to snug these and we'll need to torque them.
There you go.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to loosen it just a little.
Okay.
All right, and that way it's just snug and not torqued, over torqued. All right. Let me know when you're ready.
Yep.
All right, do the same thing. I'm going to loosen it again. There we go. All right, so now we'll torque them down to the proper spec while we're holding them using only hand tools, not the impact. All right, I'm on the bottom one. Now we can go ahead and connect the final piece of the steering linkage, which is